Good morning. It's a great pleasure to speak to you this morning about Europe's developing long-term systemic transitions agenda, which I think is a really important agenda in Europe because it tries to connect serious issues of sustainability and unsustainability in a forward-looking perspective that is not only in line with European priorities but also with global priorities such as the SDG goals that have been determined under the UN. Let me try to walk you through how we conceptualize these issues at the level of the European institutions, and in particular of how we look at this from a European Environment Agency perspective, being the place where we try to deliver solid knowledge to policymakers in support of this agenda. I think it's important to understand the broad scope of this agenda, and the broad scope actually is rather simple and at the same time complicated. If you look at the challenge of the 21st century, in essence it is that we will live with 10 billion people, but we only have one planet. And if you want to live on this planet, you all want to have a good life, which means a human development index of above 0.8, good education, good health, and good living conditions. But we will have to do it within the limits of the planet. Now, what is the historic trajectory? That is that we have been told that countries first get rich and they have a big ecological footprint, and then we will start organizing ourselves with policies, and we will have societal changes and policy changes, and then we will go down there. It's called the environmental Kuznets curve, but unfortunately it doesn't work. It works for industrial pollution, but it doesn't work for footprint. And in addition to that, by 2050, if we first need to move the whole of India and Indonesia and China into rich and polluting and rich and big footprint there, the green part will be gone. So this is not the trajectory that is feasible. This is what we will have to do. We will have to have transitions in key systems that will bring us as soon as possible here. And of course, the biggest responsibility is for those who are living beyond their means and have been doing that for some time to move as quickly there as possible, which includes all the EU countries with the exception of two. That's the red dots. Now, nothing here is automatic. If you look at recent developments in the US, you know that policies matter. They are purposefully removing regulation and standards that will have an impact on the environment, bigger footprint, while reducing high quality of life, if you think of air quality and water quality, for example. So, if we want to respond to this, the most integrated global perspective is undoubtedly the Sustainable Development Goals. They are well known to you. I will not dig into them. The question then is, what is Europe's response by 2030 and beyond? Well, if you look at the European policy development, it's clear that 2030 is becoming the new sort of landmark. If you think of the whole agenda on climate and energy post-Paris, that is clearly a 2030 perspective. If you think of Europe's responses to sustainability, they are framed in a 2030 perspective. If you think of the circular economy package, 2030 perspective. So this is starting to happen, and on top of that, Europe has a 2050 vision on these long-term challenges that I will speak to in a minute. In terms of policy developments, I think it's important to distinguish between developments within existing regulation, and that is an emphasis for the moment on implementation and compliance. I think this is absolutely essential in the longer term because, for example, on air quality, big debate right now, or on waste, there is a big compliance and implementation gap, and also the strengthening of policies. Air quality policies are clearly strengthened because we know more from recent science on how that works. But I think the real challenge is in this 2050 vision and how it connects to what we do for towards 2030. And the 7th Environment Action Programme is rather clear. It says that we should live well within the limits of the planet, which is exactly the same as my initial graph. And in order to do that, we have to do two things, or three things rather. We have to go from a linear economic model to a circular model, from high carbon to low carbon. And the often forgotten third factor is that we need to protect biodiversity, ecosystems, natural capital. Those are the terms that are used in a much more fundamental way, which is not self-evident. Now, is the EU developing policies in line with those objectives? And you could say yes. And in the 70AP it says that this transformation or transition is set in motion with long-term integrated strategies. And let me mention the three most well-known one: the circular economy package, more than 50 initiatives that will hopefully push us in the direction from a linear to a circular model, the energy union, which fundamentally links in a longer-term perspective climate and energy objectives, and again, often less mentioned, but equally important, the plan on nature, people, and the economy, where natural capital is the driver. For example, if you use terminology like the bio-based economy, or you look at nature-based solutions, this is where these elements are anchored in a broader long-term perspective. This puts a real issue on the table. How do we define sustainability? And I think if you think of transitions, it's important to know what your starting point and your sort of framework is. This is what we all grew up with. Sustainable development is the overlap of social, environment, and economic targets, and there we draw the arrow, it's sustainability. Well, I would say this is obviously not sustainability in the long term, if for nothing else that on a finite planet, you cannot have a little bit of sustainability. So the model that we use in the agency is that we take living well within the limits of the planet seriously. The limits of the planet are the ecosystems. That is the boundary condition within which we need to organize the societal systems that provide our well-being. The energy system, the food system, the mobility system, and the urban system is the way in which we conceptualize this. Yeah? Which means that in these SDGs, actually there is an implicit order. They're not the same. Yeah? This is the wedding cake model, as it's called, for the SDGs, where it's clearly that the biosphere, the natural capital, this is within the limits of the planet. We have to organize our society, and the economy should facilitate and be embedded in these two others. The implicit ordering in the SDGs. To put it in a separate way, if you look at the evolution on the planet since the Industrial Revolution, on socio-economic trends, we see this sort of rapid increase of the economy, of population, of investments, of energy use, of water use, of tourism, transportation, fertilizers in agriculture. It's a sort of exponential growth. That's a socio-economic state in which we live. This is the impact on Earth systems. CO2 emissions, NOx emissions, methane, ocean acidification, tropical forest loss. You all know this. Now, the promises that we make in the SDGs and in the 7th Environment Action Programme are the following. That although the trend is like this, that we will either flatten it out or that it will go back. We have language for that. Steady state economics. Yeah? No net loss when you think of land and forests. Or cutting carbon emissions by 95%. Yeah? So if the trends have been going like this, the real questions then become, how feasible and credible is it that in the next 20, 30 years, they will start going like this, or they will flatten out? That's an important question. And then what sort of policies, what sort of social change, and what sort of knowledge will we need to go along with this radical break of trend lines on the planet? Now, depending on how we do this, you could say that this could be our best century, or it could be our worst century. If you think of a 4-degree world, and if you think of resource depletion, water depletion, we could be in for a really rough ride, or we could be as innovative as I think we should be and look for fundamental solutions. Now, if you look at how this bodes for the environment in Europe, very briefly, if you look at the natural capital context, this is our analysis from 2015 in the State and Outlook of the Environment. The color scheme is self-explanatory. Where are we doing well policy-wise? It's where we are focusing on very specific interventions. You know, bad chemicals out of water and air, pollution, water quality, air pollution, we're doing rather well. Where are we struggling? It's where we talk about biodiversity, ecosystems, soil functions, the systemic level. In other words, our policies are successful as they are framed, but they do not translate into systemic benefits that we need. The same is true for efficiency. The paradigm is based on efficiency. We do well in more energy efficiency. We do well in industrial pollution. We do well in waste management, but we don't do so well at the systemic level of overall resource efficiency. Yeah? If you then look at risks to health, where do we do well? Again, pollution and health. Where are we struggling? In the red, climate change and chemicals, systemic elements connected to our systems of production and consumption. If you put all of that together, you get the piano of the European environment, and two things are apparent. First of all, the red keys in the past 10 years are all on systemic level: climate change, ecosystems, biodiversity primarily. If we look ahead, the green keys disappear. This is really concerning. Does it mean that we are losing confidence in European policies? No, they perform within their logic. But the key point is that we need to change the logic. We need to bring the logic to a systemic level. To put it differently, if you think of the 1960s and 70s, we are developing institutions, ministries, universities, research centers, laws on the environment and on climate. Big breakthrough in the 1980s and 90s. We sort of are at a stage now where we're not adding a lot of new legislation and planning, but we are implementing it more. At the same time, this is the evolution of ecosystems on the planet. Now, if you're a bad statistician, you say, let's stop with building institutions and laws and policies because they seem to be bad for the environment. But of course, correlation is not causality. Then the real question is, what is happening? Yeah? Well, what is happening is that maybe there's an implementation gap. Maybe we should improve the laws. Maybe we have to wait a bit longer for the effects. That's all maybes. But in the end, our conclusion is that most of what we have been doing is not addressing the core issues. And the core issues are the fundamental unsustainability of globalized systems of production and consumption and their impact on the planet. To put it in another way, well known in the Belgian context, of course, is that the transport and mobility system, where yes, you can build cleaner and more fuel-efficient cars. If that is not enough to reach your climate objectives, you cannot decarbonize the mobility system based on a combustion engine. Is the answer then that we all drive an electric car? Well, it's a big technology jump. You can think of it as a system of batteries that you hook up in renewable energy production of electricity. Big step forward. But of course, we all know the situation in Belgium in terms of traffic. We would still be standing still a significant number of hours, and the situation is getting worse and worse. So the real systemic answer is, why are we all there with 1.2 people in the car at the same time? Why are we not using another transportation system? How is our spatial planning related to this type of results? And I have to say, living in Copenhagen, 1 million people, and living in Denmark, 1 million, or in Brussels with 1 million people, it's clear that policies matter. Brussels and Copenhagen have the same access to technology, so technology alone is not going to solve the issue. It's vision, it's policies, it's a concept of how to organize a city around mobility. Now, if we think of changes in understanding, we see a lot of changes in modern society. Yeah? The whole internet and what it means for core things like friendship, the whole hybridization of people, artificial intelligence, the great acceleration, the speeding up of everything. But I think in our domain, the understanding of the Anthropocene is really the new sort of fundamental understanding. The planet looks the way in which we as human beings, to a large extent, make it look. New concepts also, planetary boundaries, yeah, where it's clear that we are reaching some limits. We're in the red zone in a couple of elements. Everybody is looking at climate change for all the good reasons, but I would like to point out that biodiversity loss and the nitrogen cycle are much more concerning for the moment, where we are now. And of course this is linked to land use and to fragmentation and to the food system, to agricultural practices, to put it in simple terms. Yeah? We also need to think of other core elements of the system, like what is the role of the financial system in all of that. Europe is now working on a sustainable finance strategy that will include essential elements of knowledge on environment and on climate. So these core reflections need to be there. Are there magic potions? Well, some, specifically in technology, seem to think that big data will solve things, or that artificial intelligence will be the next big breakthrough there. I'm not ignoring any of that. In fact, as an agency, we are planning a strategy to work with these elements, but I think we still have enough scope and room to use our own intelligence before we rely on artificial intelligence solely. Of course, we have the Earth observation, Copernicus data, citizen science. A lot of things are changing that can be helpful, but I don't think there is a magic potion. This will be a long, arduous, innovative, creativity demanding process of society. And you are the people working on transitions. It is in the end about fundamental shifts in systems, yeah? On structures, practices, values, lifestyles, policies, all of the above. What are, I think, the necessary conditions to frame policies and trajectories here? I think they need a number of elements, and I think these are for your consideration in what you are going to discuss today. First of all, you need a strong consistency. You cannot reinvent your energy system in light of climate objectives every 3 or 4 years when you change government. You cannot reinvent your agricultural practices every 3 or 4 years. And often they say this is needed for investors. They want security and they want stability. I say we all need that. It's not just investors. As a citizen, you also invest in society. As a policymaker, you invest in society. As a school, you invest in knowledge. So we need a consistent needle on the compass. The needles are there. Low carbon, circular economy, high natural capital value. You need coherency, yeah? Tax policies, R&D policies, innovation policies, harbor policies in a Belgian context, a Flemish context, are important. You need coherency. Not easy to do, but necessary. Strong implementation, yeah? Weak implementation delegitimizes whatever we are trying to do. A sense of urgency, yeah? Which is clearly there, I think, with a lot of players now in climate. Yeah? If you Google climate change and urgency, you have more than 2 million hits. Yeah? If you Google biodiversity or ecosystems and urgency, hardly any hits. So the sense of urgency needs to be there on several layers. But then I think also we need to have a visionary and engaging approach to things. It's not enough to come with a set of measures. This will be about engaging with society and all players in society in a visionary way. And I think, and that's where I would like to end, it's high time also that we go from a discussion on, yes, we know the objectives and we all agree to them, but we need to be realistic and pragmatic, which often means we can't go too fast, and we shouldn't go too radical in a direction, and we should be very careful because there are many ways in which you can slow down processes. I think we should go to the understanding of what are credible steps on a trajectory to 2050. And credible steps for me means that they are in the right direction. Yeah? We shouldn't be investing in things that are not contributing to decarbonization or to circular economy. They need to be credible. Yeah? And the things are changing quickly. Our latest report talks about renewable energy investments in Europe. Well, 86% of all the investments now in new energy systems in Europe are renewable. So the direction there is moving quickly. Yeah? That's important. But also, they should be appropriate to deal with the challenges. That is a part of credibility. Are they really taking the problem in a serious way? Yeah? If we need to decarbonize our economy with 95% in 2050, it's not enough to reduce carbon emissions by 1% per year. That is not credible anymore. They have to be at the right scale. We need to step away from the project here and there to a broader rollout of new ways of organizing ourselves. Also, this is the scaling up discussion, the speeding up. Are we doing it fast enough? Yeah? Are we going in the direction that we need to go in at a fast enough pace? And also, what is the cost of inaction? We often read about the cost of action, but increasingly we understand on climate, but also on natural resources, also on health and environment interrelations, that the cost of inaction in the long term could be much, much higher than the cost of action. So I hope this sort of framing on why we need to connect European policies to global challenges and why it is not enough to better do what we do today, but to fundamentally change this, can be a contribution to your discussions today. I'm sorry I can't be with you. I would have loved to listen to your debates and contribute to them, but I hope this contribution will be helpful. Thank you.